Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to see everyone back again and from all different parts of the world, it looks like. So thank you for joining us this morning for our MAPLE B.C. event with the discussion on the metaverse. For those of you who are joining us for the first time or don't know me, my name is Jason Tse. I'm the Executive Director for MAPLE here in British Columbia, working along with my colleagues and founders Stephen Armstrong and Robert Kelly down in Southern California. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen here. So welcome to our spring reception. It looks like it's actually a spring day here in Vancouver, but I'm not sure what yesterday was. We had a mix of everything here. We had hail and rain and sun, and I think there was even snow in the higher parts of Vancouver as well. So hopefully today, I think it's 7 degrees and sunny here in Vancouver, and the start of actual real spring as we move forward here. So I thought what I'd do today is just give you a little bit of an update in terms of what's going on with Maple, and then get right into our metaverse panel discussion with our esteemed panelists. So just a couple of details before we get started. So we are recording today's presentations, and a copy will be available in follow-up Maple communication. Your questions are welcome, and so there'll be an opportunity to enter them in the Q&A box during the session today, and we'll try to get to many of those as possible. Attendees audio is muted for optimal sound quality for our presentation and panel discussion. So just an update in terms of what's been going on with Maple throughout our network, as well as here locally. So a couple of new members in 2022. Sapan Semzida, CEO of Sustainable Technology Solutions in Los Angeles, has recently joined us. They have some pretty interesting technology in terms of using drone technology to assess heat loss in buildings. So I had a chance to connect with Sapan, and a very interesting person and company as well. Also joining us, Invest Alberta, a new Crown corporation introduced by the province of Alberta for investment attraction into the province. And then Roland DGA, a retailer of large format inkjet printers based in Irvine, California, has been able to join us as well. So big thanks, of course, to our renewing members who I saw earlier. Alina Poliski, Managing Director of Art One Translations. Thank you, Alina, for joining us here again and renewing your membership. Marco Dukovic over at Global Container Terminals. Marco is the VP of Public Affairs, so we thank Marco for his ongoing support as well. Bill Jones over at Innovistas Consulting. Bill is the VP of Smart Technologies and Innovation, also renewing. And of course, Ted Lau. Ted, big supporter of our events. We really appreciate, Ted, your support at not only our BC events, but our events throughout our network. And Ted was also really instrumental in terms of organizing some of our speakers here and panelists here today. So thanks again, Ted. And some of our anchor members, Air Canada, also renewing their membership for this year. And I understand from our colleagues at Air Canada, their network across transborder will now be back almost to 2019 levels this summer. So that's great to hear, with a lot of new services even coming out of YVR and other stations as well. And then for another renewing member, Fasken, big supporter of ours, both here in BC as well as throughout our network. And Fasken will actually be hosting the InvestTech event in partnership with the U.S. Commercial Service in 2 weeks' time as well. So we thank Fasken for their ongoing support and involvement with Maple. So in terms of our members, Stephen always says it gives us a real opportunity to get outside our swim lanes. And I think that's you're getting increasing diversity in terms of different sectors that we're getting membership from. So we now have a membership from across 24 sectors. So hopefully that provides an opportunity, which you probably even saw today, to learn a little bit more about different industries and network with folks from other sectors as well. And then speaking in terms of diversity, also from a geographic perspective, we now have members based in 25 markets, and also represented through 3 chapters now in New York, Southern California, and here in BC. But we also have aspirations to expand into further chapters as well, and we'll have some news coming down the line on that in the near future as well. So just a couple of upcoming events to take note of. So as I mentioned earlier, in 2 weeks' time, in partnership with the U.S. Commercial Service, we're hosting with them the Select USA Invest Tech event, really for technology companies who are looking to expand their presence in the U.S. That is April 27th, hosted again in partnership with the U.S. Commercial Service and Maple, and will be held at Fasken's offices in downtown Vancouver. And so we're really fortunate to have many of our members actually as speakers at the event, including Zahai Korpe, Mo from Westmark Tax, who I saw here earlier today, Sterling Capital Partners, and also the host from Fasken as well. This actually leads up to the main Select USA event in Washington on June 26th to 29th, and I believe we'll also have a speaker from Select USA at that time as well. To kick off the seminars, we'll have Consul General at the Consul General, the U.S. Consul General in Vancouver, Brent Hart, will be kicking off festivities. Brent Hart was actually one of our attendees at our earlier Mixer events last year, and we were fortunate enough at Maple to have him as we were one of his first organizations he will speak at upon his arrival into Vancouver. And this will all be hosted through the Master of Ceremonies, Nathan Donahue, the commercial attaché for Western Canada at the U.S. Commercial Service. So there's more details on this event at maplecouncil.org/events. Also coming up, a couple of our Maple events. Our New York chapter will be holding their event on May 18th, with more details to come on our website. And then our Maple SoCal chapter will be having their event in person on June 15th. And also one of our partners, Select LA, through LA EDC and the World Trade Center LA, will be hosting their event in person on June 22nd and 23rd at the Sheraton Grand in LA. I've noted this is free for international delegates, so for anyone from Vancouver, Canada, going into LA, it is of no charge. And so there'll be more information again on our Maple Council/community events page as well. As we move forward here in BC, we're hoping to get back into in-person events. So if you are interested perhaps in hosting an event in partnership with Maple, do let us know. And of course, we're always looking for new members to support our activities here. So whether it's your organization or members in your network who may be interested, do let us know and we can follow up with them to provide some more information. So yeah, that was sort of the update on Maple, but we're really interested now in terms of, and thankful to a couple of our panelists here for spending some time with us to talk a little bit about the metaverse, something that I feel pretty passionate about, but it's still really early stages, and we'll see how this really leads down as we move from Web 2 to Web 3. But really interested to hear some thoughts from our panelists. But I thought maybe before we start off, I'd just run a really quick video. Again, it's still early stages, so what the metaverse really happens to be 10 years from now can be very different than what we see it as today. But this is a quick video from Reuters and just talks about what the metaverse is explained as it is today. So about a 3-minute video, and I'll just run through this one fairly quickly here. So,
Facebook is planning to rebrand itself with a new name to focus on the metaverse. South Korean millennials and Gen Z are also gathering in virtual alternative worlds. The term metaverse is fast becoming a buzzword in tech and business. But do you know what it means? Here's Reuters' Elizabeth Howcroft.
So the word metaverse is quite a broad term. Generally, it refers to online spaces that allow people to interact in a more immersive way than a traditional website. This could be through the use of virtual reality, so wearing a VR headset, but people also use the term metaverse to refer to virtual environments where you have an avatar, a little cartoon person representing itself, and you can walk around and interact with other people's avatars, like in a video game.
Fans of the metaverse see it as the next stage in the development of the internet.
Your different monitors.
CEO Mark Zuckerberg said in July that Facebook will transition from being a social media company to a metaverse company in the next 5 years. They've already invested heavily in developing virtual and augmented reality headsets and glasses, and will reportedly create 10,000 jobs in the European Union to bring their metaverse plans to life.
We shouldn't really have to physically be together to feel present or collaborate or brainstorm.
And Facebook is certainly not alone. Other investors and companies are getting excited about being a part of the next big thing. The term metaverse is popular in Silicon Valley, with Microsoft also talking about converging the digital and physical worlds.
Because of the global health crisis, over the past 18 months, more people have been working from home and going to school remotely, spending a lot more time online and missing out on human interaction. At the moment, we connect with people who aren't physically near us by going to websites such as social media platforms or using messaging apps and video calls. But now some people think there's more demand for online spaces where people's interactions can be more multidimensional and lifelike, allowing people to immerse themselves in digital content rather than simply viewing it.
There is also a specific type of metaverse which uses blockchain technology, the same technology that's behind Bitcoin. One of such blockchain-based virtual worlds is Decentraland. In there, users can buy digital assets such as clothes and even land using cryptocurrencies. Fashion companies are noticing the trend, experimenting with making virtual clothing which people's avatars can wear in metaverse environments. While the metaverse offers a new space for people to socialize, trade, game, and even attend music concerts, right now, it's still no comparison to the real world.
So you might have seen science fiction films that are set in fully fledged metaverses or alternate digital worlds that are almost indistinguishable from real physical life. But that's still the stuff of fiction. At the moment, most virtual spaces I've seen look more like the inside of video games than real life.
So maybe just something to think about, and just an early introduction in terms of what we may think the metaverse may look like moving forward. So I want to just take some time now to introduce our panelists. So really fortunate to have two panelists with us today. Unfortunately, Katrina from Coco NFT was not able to attend. She had a personal urgent issue. She had to attend at the last moment, but we're very thankful to have James and JJ join us. So James Basnet is the CEO of Shape Immersive. James is a metaverse guide based in Vancouver, BC, although today actually calling in from Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. So thanks very much, James. Where he's building a metaverse team since 2016. Shape is a metaverse leader, having built immersive experiences for Red Bull, Olympics, and FKT, now since acquired by Nike. Prior to Shape, James was the Chief Strategy Officer of Momentous, a retail innovation lab that was acquired and now part of the Cognizant family, where he built augmented reality, virtual reality, and Internet of Things products for Verizon, Lululemon, Reddit, and Shell. He has spoken on VR and blockchain at South by Southwest, VR AR Summit, Global Summit, and is a contributing writer for VR Scout. I also note that James is also VA in economics from UBC, similar to myself as well. And joining us from Buenos Aires is JJ Jones. So JJ comes from a storytelling background with a decade of experience in film production. He founded Mythical City Games, where he launched the hit strategy game series Battlefleet, amongst other titles. JJ also heads IndiePod Vancouver, a weekly meetup group that brings together and supports Vancouver-based game developers. In addition to MCG, he also leads XR and technology at LNG Studios. He's currently focused on virtual reality and augmented reality development for the studio's existing and new IP. So I'm just going to stop sharing here. And let's see here. And so maybe if I can get James and JJ, if you're able to turn on your mics and video. So maybe I'll start with yourself first, JJ. Did you want to just tell us a little bit about your company and your other companies and your involvement with the industry, and maybe just get us started that way?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. So my name is JJ, and I head up the XR and technology at LNG Studios. So LNG Studios is a creative visualization company. We develop 3D visualizations and interactive experiences for a variety of industries, mainly in real estate, but as well as retail and other industries. So we bring some of the technology that is my background, which is game development and VR and games, and we bring some of that technology over to the enterprise space. So how do we apply things like VR and AR into the enterprise world for our clients there? So we mainly focus on cutting edge technologies such as Microsoft HoloLens for the AR side, new headsets such as the Nreal, as well as VR technology like Oculus Quest and HTC Vive. So we've been doing that since 2016, and we are also experimenting, exploring on the metaverse side to see how does some of the technology that we can bring over from games and from our VR and AR past, how can we bring some of that over into the enterprise space in a virtual world, in a metaverse type environment that will allow them to collaborate and work together better.
Great. Thanks so much, JJ. As I say, thanks again for joining us from Buenos Aires. We are, our Latin America is well presented in our panelists here. So James, yeah, if you want to take some time and perhaps talk a little bit about Shape and some of the other things you're involved with in this vertical as well. The floor is yours.
Sounds great. Thank you, Jason, and thanks, JJ, for that intro. I'm fortunate to be in Puerto Vallarta at the moment. I arrived yesterday. And it really has been a whirlwind the last few months. I'm happy to say that I'm the CEO of Shape, and we've just completed a transaction for the acquisition of Shape by another BC-based company. We'll have some more news rolling out about that over the next 2 weeks, but it really, I think, speaks to the demand for these types of technologies and the movement and the consolidation that we will continue to see in the space around this funky term, the metaverse. I started with Shape, let's say full-time just under 2 years ago. At the beginning of the pandemic, it became clear that we were going to be moving into virtual worlds, that technologies like augmented reality and virtual reality and gaming experiences were really going to take hold given the force function, the inflection point that was COVID lockdown. Part of what drove us down there, and we felt confident in how the space would evolve, was really looking at how our brick and mortar KPIs within the retail world were going to have to change rapidly. So a lot of the biggest brands on the planet, they've been measuring themselves based on revenue per square foot. And if you close all your stores down, what happens to your business, right? And so you have to shift online at a greater pace. Companies like Lululemon, who we're very proud of, are living in this world of, direct to consumer. Nike is as well. And so Shape really decided to take a lot of what we've been building in the world of augmented reality and virtual reality, similar to JJ and LNG, into the world of enterprise and to try to help move them forward. There's two technologies that sit underneath this concept of metaverse, and Vancouver is and the rest of British Columbia are well primed to take advantage. One is spatial computing, which we can think of as the bucket for AR, VR, potentially things like 3D, like games, and those types of environments. And then the other is decentralized technologies, blockchain and crypto and Web3. So if you hear those two things happening a lot, where they connect is really providing the pillars for this broader concept of metaverse. And I know how weird it is. Everyone is has a lot of work to do. There's a lot of change that we've had to undergo through a variety of business categories the last few years. And so we want to ignore this term metaverse, right? It just sounds like a whole bunch of weird Facebook stuff that Mark's talking about, and we just don't want to have kind of take hold, or we're doubtful as to whether anyone on this call is actually going to spend a majority of their personal or professional life in a metaverse environment. And I think what's happening, what we're seeing today, and the city came out with a report last week or over the last 2 weeks around metaverse equaling 8 to $13 trillion opportunity between by 2030, right? So here's something that we think is a buzzword, but now you've got a very risk-averse institution that is positioning it as a $13 opportunity by 2030. So we can't ignore it. What's happening there? How did that number come to fruition? And a lot of that has helped shape the strategy at Shape today, trying to make sure that we understand these technologies and how to bring them together. And I think that Vancouver is extremely well primed to be leaders in this. We already are, because of spatial computing and things like blockchain. Now, if we look at blockchain, the turn of NFTs, 2 years ago, no one had really heard about it. The NFT was actually invented in Vancouver by a group that launched CryptoKitties, and today is referred to as Dapper Labs. And they're really the reason I think a lot of the market talks about NFTs today, because they launched a product called NBA Top Shot. And the explosive growth of Top Shot launched really this NFT sector. NFT is just a technology that represents something on a blockchain. It's a verified asset. The first NFTs that I created were in 2018 for physical real estate. I think that all residential real estate is going to be represented as an NFT in the future. It's really just digital set of receipts that's verified through a decentralized network. That works really well for things like property, unique items like your car. If your car has a VIN number on it, well, that can very easily be represented as an NFT. And so as we see commerce move towards a place of digital, and really the rest of our lives and businesses as well, we can start to think of the verification and the certification of physical objects as existing with an NFT as well. So NFTs created in Vancouver, the ERC 721 standard. And what you'll start to see is that there's a lot of NFT leaders around the world based in Vancouver, because we're 4 or 5 years ahead of the curve, because we were having beers with the CryptoKitties team down the street. And so what's happened is NFTs have propped up, and they are now taking digital commerce and the future of digital commerce, attaching it to spatial computing, things like AR, VR experiences, game assets, collectible ape heads in JPEG form. And the amount of transactions and the transaction volume and the growth in all of these crypto tokens is attached to NFTs now, and that is also being grouped under metaverse. And so when we hear this term metaverse, it just sounds so crazy and so broad, and this is why you're seeing such rapid growth, and you're seeing such incredible ceilings placed on its potential. And I think it's great for LNG and Shape and JJ. Leon's on here. It's a great time for these types of businesses to come out of Vancouver, because we're very fortunate to be wrapped up in this technology that seems endless in its ability to grow and its ability to eat the rest of everything. A16Z, Andreessen Horowitz, Mark Andreessen, famously said that technology, software is eating the world, right? And part and parcel of that concept is metaverse as software eating the world, and will continue to do so. So we think of Vancouver as being foundational in the concept of NFTs and the growth, the next phase of growth of crypto. We also have the highest density of 3D skill sets in Vancouver, of any tech hub in North America. So, because of VFX, because of gaming companies like EA, because of incredible spatial innovation companies like LNG, there is a lot of demand for 3D skills. We also have this really, really mature 3D education network, right? We've got a lot of schools that are pumping out 3D skill sets. So you see a lot of people from other parts of the world relocating to Vancouver to go to school for 3D. And then they stay there and they start working for companies like EA or companies like Dapper Labs or LNG. And so we have these two things coming together, spatial computing and kind of 3D, right? I think a lot of internet's 2D, a lot of gaming 3D. And we think of crypto and NFTs, that synthesis is a place where Vancouver is well positioned to be a leader for the next decade. And it is the reason why a number of global leaders within metaverse are starting to come out of Vancouver and out of British Columbia. We've got a great opportunity to keep this type of growth and success happening. And I think that the acquisition of Shape is indicative of really what's to come over the next 5 or 10 years, because there's just such a demand for the skill sets. Really, anybody who understands what the term is right now has an opportunity. So, we feel quite fortunate to be based in Vancouver and to be growing our team there, and about all the other opportunities coming in. I will just one last little piece here about Shape, and happy to talk more about the concept. We look like a game studio from a skill set standpoint. We have a lot of 3D skill sets, AR, VR, all the way from art conception to creating 3D models and then plugging them into experiences using technologies like Unity and Unreal. So that's really what we look like. If you try to zoom out and say, like, what does that business look like in comparison with others. It's kind of like a game studio with a strategy arm. We have, over the last few months, had inbound opportunities from Microsoft, Sephora, and GameStop. We're GameStop's metaverse agency of record now. There's a $100 million NFT fund plugged in there. I could keep going on with the amount of opportunity that's flowing in. But for a small Vancouver agency to have this kind of inbound, I never would have expected it. I've never seen it before. Where companies were doing $250 million in annual revenue and have to pay a team of 35 to try to get a phone call with these companies, right? But we have this inbound. And so there really just is a tremendous demand for support in figuring out metaverse, but there aren't enough companies yet serving that demand. And so it's a great time to be LNG Studios. It's a great time to be Shape Immersive. And that's what we're seeing in the market. We're having a tremendous amount of fun. And I'm happy to sit with anyone today and discuss what is the metaverse and do we believe in it? How is it going to impact my community, my family, and my business? I wish Marco was here at the moment. I'd love to think about how does the metaverse impact the Port of Vancouver? Is there a way? And a lot of what we're doing today is trying to find ways where businesses like that can be supported and experienced through metaverse technologies.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks, James. Well, thanks so much, actually, for taking the time to come and talk to us today, especially as you mentioned, you're right in the middle of a really large transaction for your company. So really appreciate that. And also the other thing that you mentioned is just the breadth of the ecosystem for the metaverse and how NFTs are created here in Vancouver. I used to work in economic development, and a consultant came in and said, where you guys can really prosper is where you can combine, where you have different strengths. So two of the areas I think in Vancouver where we've had traditional strength is like film and TV and gaming. And when you combine that, you can create sort of an expertise in a new industry. And perhaps that's been a catalyst for growing our expertise in the metaverse. I'm just going to maybe get into the Q&A a little bit, but would encourage the audience here, if you have any questions, to do add them in the Q&A section, and we'll try to get to those if we have time. Maybe if I can just get to some of the questions just to kick things off a little bit. And maybe this is for JJ to kick off, is as we move forward from sort of an early inception of what we deem to be the metaverse to sort of mainstream adoption, what do you see as the catalyst for that? Is that development of wearables like Google Glasses, or the next iteration of the smartphone, or is it new software development, advancement of gaming, or a combination of both? How do you sort of see that, JJ?
Sure, thank you. So I think there's a number of things that could help to move forward the adoption of metaverse or metaverse worlds. I don't think we're so tied to hardware technology as much, because we do have a pretty good already start on that side with VR technology that's fairly accessible at this point. But one of the things that it's missing is sort of this killer application, or this reason why people want to go into some sort of a virtual world, that they would want to spend more significant time in this world, whether it's for entertainment or social purposes or for workplace use. So we're sort of missing that kind of element. And I think a lot of that will come from software and the kind of technologies that support some of that software. So right now, in the kind of the ecosystem of virtual worlds or metaverse worlds, there's a number of disparate, separate entities. So that video mentioned Decentraland, places that can offer you to buy items and objects and things like that. And there's sort of this mishmash of different places. Meta is working on their own concepts. But one of the things that's missing is sort of a portable identity across these different worlds. Just like we have in reality, you have your identity that you can take with you that goes with you everywhere. And this ability to be able to traverse these different worlds and spend time with people you're working with, or where people, your friends or family, but have an identity that's easy to traverse across worlds. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you want to have the same spin on your identity. You are maybe take on a different persona when you go to a bar with your friends versus when you're at your workplace. But your identity is still the same. And your sort of history and your background, this is all still the same and comes with you, but there doesn't really exist anything like this in sort of these metaverse worlds to help connect these environments. I think that's one area that's a little bit that needs to be developed for this to take hold a little bit more, and to simplify the process of getting into different virtual worlds. Because right now you have to create accounts with all of the different systems. You have to figure out how they work together, whether they do or they don't. One of the other areas is also the portability of assets across networks or across different worlds. And blockchain is what the technology that enables this to happen, but there's not quite an implementation of it yet that works for the mainstream. So the idea of portability of assets, what I mean by that is, let's say you buy an item or property in something like CryptoKitties or Decentraland or one of these virtual worlds. You buy something that's tied to the blockchain to be able to either take that object or its value into other environments, take things with you between different worlds, or take the value that you have in one world and take it to somewhere else. That portability is something that's really missing, and the simplicity of a simple sort of portability. So again, if we compare that to the real world, you have real assets, real objects that you can take with you, no matter whether you're at one city or another. You can go and take something with you that's important to you, whether it's a piece of clothing, whether it's actually something you can use for work, or property that you can buy and sell between different worlds and different environments. So this is something that will help to bridge that connection between the virtual metaverse world and the real world, and this understanding that, yes, these things actually have a permanence to them, because that's one of the core sort of concepts of any sort of metaverse world, is a permanence to things that you own or create or you can have within those worlds, is that they're persistent and permanent. It's not something where you go into a video game world and it only exists for that one session that you're playing, or within that siloed environment, and you can never remove it. You can't do anything with it outside of that. So I think we need technologies and implementations of technologies that help enable those two things to make this process easier and to make the accessibility greater for any kind of metaverse worlds that come around. Our perspective kind of at LNG for the metaverse world is to be able to provide enterprise customers or enterprise uses within those virtual worlds. And to do that, they also need this ability to have this portability of assets, to be able to take the things that they've built, for example, in the real world, and have a digital version of it, for example, in architecture space, to be able to have something that you've designed in the real world. Maybe it hasn't even been built in the real world, but a design you're working on, being able to bring that as an actual permanent, persistent asset into a virtual world, be able to display it, discuss it with colleagues or the industry in general. So there's a lot of connection between this permanence of objects and assets and portability between environments that will help to enable the kind of act as a catalyst and help enable the access.
Yeah, great. Thanks, JJ. I was sort of looking around Decentraland sandboxes, and you can see in my background, I've snipped a picture from Decentraland there as well. But it's sort of interesting, but it's sort of also in the back of my mind is like, are these the actual lands that are going to be sort of the permanent moving forward, or is it going to be something from, Facebook or what have you? Are we looking at, like, are these the Alta Vistas and Netscapes and Mosaics that we saw in Web 2? And so you sort of have the first stage of companies, but then it eventually gets taken over by sort of more large tech, big tech, or more established companies as we move forward. So it'll be interesting to see how things sort of play out there. So we can get some questions here from the group, which is great. Maybe I can just ask James a quick off question as well, especially since you're just coming off an acquisition of your company. How do you sort of see the big players in the metaverse as moving forward? Maybe it's really hard to say because we don't really haven't defined what the metaverse looks like. Is it going to be a domain that's sort of dominated by the Apples and the Metas and the Amazons of the world as we sort of see it in Web 2, or is it really going to open the stage for a lot of smaller players to be really relevant in this domain?
Yeah, so I think we're seeing an arms race play out in front of us. Artifact, which was acquired by Nike 2 months ago, is a customer of ours. They became the darlings of the NFT world. The Activision Blizzard acquisition by Microsoft, $70 billion, is massive. How do you justify, these types of spends? And what we saw yesterday or the last few days is that Lego and Sony are coming together to invest in Epic, which creates Unreal. So there's an arms race. I think a lot of what's driving it too is IP. There's a demand for IP, and so the Activision Blizzard sale to Microsoft is about taking all of that game IP. Now you can use it to create these new metaverse experiences that don't exist already. We're seeing this play out in the public markets a lot. IP is very important. The emergence of NFTs has kind of, provides a new financial layer and connectivity to IP. Instead of it sitting on in some legal agreements and some stuff sitting on a shelf, back in the Sony studio. Now everything's digital and it's connected into a global network. It can be leveraged in a tremendous number of ways. And so that first thing I'm seeing is IP, and that is around these experiences. And then there's a lot of consolidation going around hardware as well, right? The large tech players are out there trying to buy anybody that does anything with optics, anything that does anything with the miniaturization of technology. Really, I'm not wearing my glasses at the moment, but if you can imagine, your iPhone, we have to shrink all this technology down and put it into the frame of our glasses. So it's really the big tech players that can see the vision. They have the capital to go out and acquire these companies, but because the space is so new, there's a lot of opportunity for new entrants as well. I think it's kind of like the second mover, the middle of the pack groups that are going to struggle, right? They don't quite have the vision and the capital to go do the big splashy things. And so I think the little guys, a lot of new market entrants, we're going to see that happen over the next decade. But I do think that the large tech, the FANGs, if you will, are going to be leading for the next while. What we're seeing too with them is that there's tremendous amount of investment, both in IP, right, which we can think of as purely digital, as well as in hardware. And then, some of the foundational technologies that run it, like Amazon is investing quite heavily now into spatial computing, but in the cloud, right? If we can't shrink down our iPhone into our glasses perfectly, we're gonna have to cut the corners a little bit. What's happening now is the cloud is going to be doing a lot of the processing that the iPhone is doing to send in these, virtual experiences in front of us. So, that's really where I see it happening. And Vancouver, again, is really well positioned. We have a very vibrant AR, VR, spatial computing community. A lot of it's built by Dan Berger, who's one of the founders of Shape. You can follow Dan on LinkedIn. It's a lot of fun there. That's BURGAR. And then groups like JJ has founded, and JJ is doing a tremendous job of cultivating that community, right? So I think we have this really vibrant network of young companies that can go out there and build great things. And then we also have some of these headquarters in and around BC as well, right? The Canadian headquarters for large tech companies. You've got rich presence around Amazon, AWS, Microsoft. And so I think that's how we're kind of going to see it, right? The market entrants and the FANGs are really going to own the space. And the second movers, third movers in the middle are going to take some time to figure out, what they're going to do, how they're going to evolve to take advantage.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your insight, James. And it's just really topical. We were just talking before this too. Is just the news comes out every week, and as you mentioned, the Lego and Sony injections into Epic Games, and how there's beginning to segment different demographics there, because I guess they're targeting the younger demographic for the metaverse. And so, how this all takes shape out, and then as we move forward as well, will be really interesting.
Follow up on that, James. Maybe wanted to see what your thoughts are on whether some of these large companies that are entering into these spaces, and maybe some of the clients you guys have worked with, do you find that there is a interest for those, apart from just the acquisitions, for those companies to work together to provide some sort of standards or a simplification of how people access their different worlds or anything like that, or is everybody kind of siloing their own environments and trying, like you're saying, sort of an arms race of trying to be the first one to have a successful or a mainstream metaverse world?
Yeah, well, you know what? I think it's a complicated answer too. Let's take Microsoft for example, right? So they buy Activision and Blizzard. There's a lot of IP in there. They want to use some of their hardware, things like Xbox, to try to stitch this whole thing together. But then we also have a group at Microsoft that reaches out to us and says, "Hey, can you help us? Like, we need a metaverse partner." And so they're large enough that they can go do that acquisition, and they've got strategy happening in part of the organization that the other part doesn't have access to, right? And maybe they don't get access to the metaverse experts at Microsoft, and so they've got to call, some of these smaller partners down the street or up the street, past the border, for some support there. When we look at, I think we all have to come together to figure it out. I know that we all do. And the standards, I think, is another opportunity for market entrants and smaller firms to play, a bigger role than they typically would, right? We've got new foundational technology. The standards that JJ and team can write are going to be just as valuable as some of the big players, if not more valuable, because we have a little bit of an agency perspective, like how do the technologies come together, as opposed to the competitive limitations of having to think within their own siloed Microsoft type world, right? And so maybe even more important for the Shapes and the LNGs in the world to play a part now in bringing everything together. And I think that's why we see demand for our services and some of the value that we've been creating out there for these companies, because we really just have a better vantage point, because we're not locked in, we're not siloed, or we don't have the horse blinders on for how to make this all sing together in harmony.
Great. Thanks. So we've got a couple of questions here from the audience here. So thanks very much, Sean. Sean Williams. Sean's question is, can the panelists speak to applications the metaverse may have as a collaborative workplace platform in different industries? So who'd like to take that question?
I think we both probably have had experience in a number of kind of collaborative environments or developing collaborative spaces as well, especially in sort of the game development side of things. Is many of our products and games that we've worked on are also have elements of a multi-user, multiplayer experience, and there's a natural collaborative element to some of those games. Some of them are competitive, some of them are collaborative as well, and so we've seen how are some of the ways that people actually enjoy to collaborate together, and what are some of the benefits that they can do that they can't do in the real world. And so if we extract that out to some of the kind of collaborative environments, right now they've mostly been used as a sort of a social meeting platform, a bit of a replacement for a video call, where you're able to see a virtual avatar of somebody, and perhaps you can bring up a slideshow or maybe a 3D model and maybe you'll look at it. But one of the other things that you can do that you can't really do in real life is you can transport people to an actual location. So if they want to examine the inside workings of a factory or view an architectural model of an entire building or a house or something, it's much easier to transport them into this virtual world so they can walk around and explore together than if they were to just review a 3D model of it online on their computer, or the complexity of having to fly out everybody to a factory to be able to examine it, and the safety, sort of the concerns around that, versus if you have a digital twin of some object or a building or an environment, you can not only bring people all there so they can actually walk around that environment together in a virtual sense, but then you can also make modifications and changes to these places in real time that you also can't do in reality. So we did a retail project where the stakeholders were able to view changes to a retail environment in real time while they walked through that environment, and they could experience the differences between the way things were arranged in one setup versus another. And that's something you can't easily reproduce in the real world. but it gives you a much better sense of what are you building, what are you actually working on, and what things do you need to improve, what can you notice that are problems before you build something. So I think those are some great collaborative sort of use cases, especially if some of these things have a persistent element to them, so that allows people to visit and view and collaborate on them on any time on their own schedule. So if you have a training scenario or something that is in a metaverse environment world that has persistence to it, so that it's always up, it's always around, that a user from the other side of the world or a client could view and go through this training scenario, go through this environment, perhaps even make changes to it if that's allowed, and do it on their own time. So it sort of frees up location, frees up time, so you don't have to do things all at the same time, and it allows you to view things that don't exist, or have greater access to the fundamentals of what you're building that you can't replicate in real life because it's impractical or simply impossible. So I think those are a touch of some of the benefits that in the corporate sense or in enterprise sense you can bring only in virtual worlds or potentially in metaverse type environments.
Okay, great.
Yeah, if I could just add in there quickly, there's a really fun, we could call them a metaverse company based in Victoria called Lamazoo. And Lamazoo has a product called Mind Life, which I think certainly in British Columbia, very resource-driven economy, is worth checking out for anybody that hasn't seen it. And what they do is they build digital twins of minds, and then they integrate live data from the SAP installation, right? So if you think about the cost of flying somebody up to, 100-mile house for 3 days, and the implications that has around things like COVID and lockdown, resourcing talent from around the world. With something like Mind Life, you drop somebody in the mine from any part of the planet, and they can see live data, but they also have then, the spatial experience of being able to build solutions. Before, you used to look at a spreadsheet, you couldn't actually figure out how to develop a mine solution. You had to fly to site. But with a virtual reality experience that LNG is capable of type building, that Lamazoo builds today, you can go in and get all the information you need, the data you need, with the spatial information you need to design solutions from other parts of the world. And so it's really going to, I think, change a lot of corporate and enterprise collaboration, certainly for BC-based resource companies.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see these types of applications that really will forward sort of the application of the metaverse. I know at the airport where I work, we're really sort of pushing the digital twin in that application towards different scenario modeling and things like that as well. Our next question is actually from our principal, Robert Kelly, is also with Oracle as well. This question is about how do you see security of personal data and identity getting to a stage where we're comfortable getting into these types of environments? James, did you want to take a run at that?
Yeah, sure. This is a question I get certainly within these types of conversations and presentations regularly. A lot of the data is running through our standard, cloud and authentication protocols that we use for Web 2 experiences. I think that the integration of decentralized technologies, crypto, NFT wallets, is going to allow us to own a lot more of our data that we currently share out. So it will improve, security on a personal level over time as the technology matures. And like, ICBC was hacked last week. And they stole all of our passwords and our email addresses and at-home addresses and things of that nature. When we hold that data ourselves in our devices and we're sharing it, so it's not sitting in somebody else's database, it's going to improve our security. And then what we're also finding is personal identity and the feeling of security, which is different than, hard data security. How do we feel as sharing? The older generations didn't grow up with social media. Not having a display picture feels more comfortable to them. I've certainly seen the difference in generations. Gen Z puts everything on there, and they're starting to use social media as a positive feedback loop for all their passions. they don't understand existence without sharing everything online. And that's how does that impact somebody who's 50, somebody who's 60? And what I think, and the argument I've been making, and JJ, I'd love to have your perspective on this, is there's actually an anonymity built into these avatars. So if I'm not comfortable sharing my actual name and my actual face as I'm getting into some of these experiences, I can now go to that concert as an avatar. I can still experience the music. It's a live production. I'm not limited in a number of ways. There's new capabilities I have, but also people are not going to see me outside of work, right? And really, if I don't like the way that I look on camera, I can make my avatar anything. So I think that there's also that personal security that is attached to, self-esteem, that I think the metaverse has some benefits for as well. So I'm taking the positive look here. JJ, I'd love to have your perspective. Is this going to make things, safer for us as people in the metaverse, or is it just going to continue to degrade?
I don't think it'll degrade, but the nice thing that you touched on there is kind of control. Is if you have a virtual or digital identity that maybe is more of a consolidated digital identity, you still always have and will always have this control to be able to present yourself in a different way based on the interactions you're trying to have. And that gives people a lot of freedom to express themselves in different ways, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, but the ability to have that control that you cannot have to that extent in the real world, but you can in a virtual world when you go to a virtual concert and you can dress up the way that you want or create the kind of avatar that you want and present yourself in a different way. At some point you'll also be able to change your voice and so any elements of your kind of public persona, you'll be able to tweak and present in a way that suits you and makes you feel comfortable at in a different virtual environment or a different world. And what that allows you to do, kind of one thing that we always had a really funny takeaway to see in VR, from the first days, some of the first experiences, especially into the social VR experiences, VR chat, things like that, right away we saw one of the things was that people were so comfortable with dancing in VR that they might not have been so comfortable in real life to be dancing in front of somebody else. But as long as they were wearing this VR headset, even if they were in a room with other people in it, because their avatar was this representation of themselves, they felt more free to do what they wanted to do and to express themselves in a different way. And I think that's one of the nice, positive things that you can see from it is this level of expression that you couldn't have to this level, or that you would have to be more concerned of in the real world. But now you can sort of express yourself in these different ways. And it's sort of a learning process because we don't have a standard for that yet. We don't have a good understanding of how much do you share, how little, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate in virtual spaces. How do we change our behavior in that? And a lot of that is still being developed, but it's also something that's evolving over time as we learn more about these experiences. Now we've learned a lot more about social media and we're starting to get used to what you share, what you don't share, kind of what the levels of privacy are. People are still figuring that out, but we're getting more comfortable with it. So we have to figure the same thing out for a virtual space. Like, what elements of yourself and your personal identity do you share there? What's going to become a standard or a norm? What are people comfortable with? And what do you share in terms of safety and privacy? And inclusiveness is also a really big part of this, is how do you allow people to, in a safe way, show parts of their personality they may not want to show in the real world, or be able to express themselves in ways that they couldn't in the real world. And so there's, or maybe because of their physical ability limitations, or their social status, things like that, that may limit them in certain ways in the real world, or may put stereotypes on them in the real world. But in the virtual world, perhaps they will be able to find, we will find methods for being able to get past some of those things and allow a greater accessibility to a greater audience to be able to participate in the same ways that everyone would like to.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm one of those that would dance more in the virtual world than the actual world for sure. But I was actually just playing around Decentraland and just getting a temporary avatar. But you guys are right. Is like you do have to put some thought in how does it actually want to reflect your actual person, or are you a totally different person in the virtual environment? So just getting me to our last question here from Stephen. You guys have both talked about in terms of the breadth of the AR VR ecosystem here in Vancouver, and it looks like really well placed moving forward. But Stephen's question was in terms of weaknesses. Are there any gaps you may see in our ecosystem that may sort of prevent us from being a leader in this space moving forward? Who wants to take that, James? Or
I've been thinking about it. I don't have a clear answer. I want Vancouver. I want British Columbia. I want Canada to win the space. Like the one gap that I've seen, because I've seen other cities who were not as advanced as us, is using the tech kind of vault in the world of NFTs forward, are the IP cities. So places like New York, places like Los Angeles, places like London, because the brand headquarters, because the IP is sitting there, the decisions being made of how to use the technology are also happening there. And when we look at what's happening in and around, let's say BC, we do a lot of production for those companies, but we're not necessarily building our own. And so that's why companies like EA are so important, because we've got new IP that's being generated locally. And, this is where we see the synthesis of arts and culture, and bringing those together with, commercial circles. Try to figure out, how can we dream? How can we tell stories? How can we create IP that we're now sharing with the rest of the world? And we know that there's a brain drain, and we know that there's organizations in Canada that sole purpose of just trying to keep IP within our borders instead of flying down south the moment that you find product market fit, right, or revenue start to jump. But I would say that's really the whole there, right? Is how can we focus on IP creation as well, so that we own the stories that are being seen around the world. And instead of creating Dubai in VR, should we create Vancouver first? Because if that's one of the first metaverse experiences that people have the ability to go and visit that type of city, is that a way for Vancouver to kind of move up? Is that a way, visiting Kelowna, right? Or in Prince George, can we get these cities, as we recreate them in virtual worlds, if we will, I think we will, they can be the first, they're going to be the most visited. If they're the most visited, I think that will spell economic opportunity for the rest of the province and the rest of the country. So, my focus really, I'm still trying to figure it out, but it is around IP.
Yeah, it's almost like it reflects our film and TV space. Is like we have a lot of films done in Vancouver, but it's never Vancouver actually. But I think you both mentioned, I think Vancouver is really well placed in terms of our ecosystem and the opportunities moving forward. And who knows really what the metaverse can really look like as we move forward. So we're coming down to our close here, but I really want to thank you, JJ and James, for taking the time out of your day to share some of your thoughts about what the metaverse is today and what it can be in the future. I think it's a super interesting topic. We could probably talk for another hour, and I think if we talked a year from now, things could look very different as well. So I want to again thank you for your time, especially calling in from the other parts of, another continent, basically. But we do have a little bit of time. Perhaps I'll bring everyone back to the floor, and there'll be some opportunities to network. And if JJ and James are able to stay a little bit longer, some folks can perhaps ask you questions directly at some of the tables as well. So I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who took their time out of their day to join us here at our BC Maple event. As mentioned, we have other events ensuing at our other chapters, so feel free to visit us on our website or our social media channels. And we hope to have further events here in BC in person as we move forward into the summer as well. So I'm just going to bring everyone back to the floor level, and hopefully there's some time that you can stay around with us a little bit longer for some additional networking. Thanks and have a great day.